After several ups and downs, we're finally going to see one of the greatest tennis players return back to the Australian Open. Yep, we're talking about none other than the legendary Novak Djokovic. We all know that the Serbian couldn't play at the Australian Open this year, but he's ready to make a comeback for next year's tournament. A lot has happened and a lot has changed. Keep watching to know more.
All right, back at ya.
First up, Novak Djokovic's definitely making a comeback in 2023. Djokovic not being allowed to play at both the Australian and US Open this year was the biggest controversy in the world of tennis. He's one of the best players out there, and not seeing him play at these two important tournaments was a big blow for fans all over the world. But there's good news, people, for both Djokovic and his fans. We're going to see the 21-time Grand Slam champion compete at the Australian Open in 2023, and you bet we're pretty excited about it. The competition's only going to get tougher from here on, and that's exactly what makes tennis such an engaging sport. Even though we were told that the Australian government had placed a 3-year ban on the Serbians' entry into the country, there's been a change in that decision. And with that change, Djokovic can now enter the country and participate in the Australian Open. Up next, how 2022 was a particularly difficult year for the Serbian tennis player. First, we saw the 35-year-old was deported from Australia, and that's not where it ended. They even placed restrictions on him so that he couldn't enter the country in the future. All of it had to do with the Serbian status of vaccination. After that, the renowned tennis champion couldn't make it to the US Open for similar reasons. It was one blow after another for him. What's more, not being able to take part in these two tennis tournaments cost the 35-year-old a lot of tennis points. In light of that, he couldn't make it to number 1 this year. Djokovic has previously won the Australian Open 9 times. If he had been allowed entry into the country, he might have had his 10th title this year, but looks like this wasn't meant to be. Well, at this point, it's best to let bygones be bygones. While things definitely looked bleak at the beginning of this year, we're seeing changes now. The biggest one is a reversal of the ban imposed on Djokovic by the Australian government. Considering all that happened, this is definitely big news. Maybe we'll even see Djokovic win the 2023 Australian Open. That's something to look forward to. Now for what Janko Tipsarevic had to say about Djokovic. There's no doubt that Djokovic faced a pretty tough time this year, and here's what Janko Tipsarevic, a Serbian former tennis player, has to say about his fellow compatriot. The one thing that Janko said with absolute confidence was how even though Djokovic couldn't be a part of 2 very big tennis tournaments, it certainly didn't hinder the 21-time Grand Slam winner from staying on top. Without a doubt, this just goes to show that Djokovic remains one of the greatest and most talented tennis players out there. The 35-year-old managed to win plenty of tournaments, and in the end, he managed to rank 5th on the ATP rankings list, so even with all the troubles thrown his way, he showed the world that he was pretty much invincible. In light of that, Tipsarevic called him the best tennis player in the world, and honestly, we don't think any other tennis player could have achieved what Djokovic did. Yeah, he was deprived of some opportunities this year, but he still went and played where he could, and on top of that, he really gave it his all. We just know that we'll be seeing some serious competition in tennis in the next season. Moving on, how the Serbian made it to the top despite the obstacles in his way. All of you must be wondering how Djokovic is still so good at his game. It's a pretty common trend for most tennis players to retire in their early 30s, but at 35, Djokovic is still kicking. Sure, he had some obstacles thrown his way this year, but those didn't stop him at all. What's more, it looks like the Serbian's only going to get better. Even Goran Ivanisevic, Djokovic's coach, attests to that. Ivanisevic went on to mention how Djokovic has great stamina and that even at his age, he's still working on his physical fitness so that he continues to make improvements in his game. What's more, the way he plays is absolutely brilliant. The Serbian is pretty focused on the future. He knows that for the 2023 season, he has to give it all. He couldn't defend his title at the Australian Open this year, but now he's coming back and we just know he won't be holding himself back. Even when he's under pressure, the Serbian plays pretty well. The one thing that Ivanisevic kept talking about was Djokovic's serve. We all know that Serbian's got a pretty good serve, but in recent matches, he proved that he's been practicing to make it better than before. With a serve like that, he's definitely going to give his opponent a tough time on the courts. Let's talk about how the 35-year-old has been granted a visa for the Australian Open. A lot of you might be wondering what brought about this sudden change. Last we heard, there had been a restriction on Novak Djokovic's entry into Australia for a total of 3 years, but now there's news that there's been a reversal on that original decision. We're going to see the Serbian tennis player at the Australian Open in January 2023, and all of this has been confirmed confirmed by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, so it's official, people. The Serb will be there and the competition's going to be pretty fierce for sure. The person responsible for this good news is Australia's new immigration minister, Andrew Giles, but the man himself hasn't made any comments on it yet. Coming up, why was Djokovic banned entry into the country in the first place? At this point, all of us know about Djokovic and his refusal to get a vaccination against COVID-19. In January, when the Serbian first got to know he couldn't play at this year's Australian Open owing to his vaccination status, he tried to appeal and asked for an exemption. We all know how that went. 10 days later, the 21-time Grand Slam winner was deported from the country. Not to mention there's been a change in policy now. What made the Australian government change its decision? They seemed pretty adamant about not allowing the Serbian entry into the country earlier this year, but now there's been a complete shift, and well, the answer for that is that there's a new government now. And this new government has brought about changes in their border policies and travel restrictions. In light of that, the rules aren't all that strict anymore, especially for foreign travelers. With the change in rules, you bet Djokovic applied to have his visa request renewed, and we all know how that went. Andrew Giles gave the Serbian the green light to enter the country, and now we'll be seeing him at the Australian Open soon enough. What's more, here's the Serbian player's stance on getting vaccinated. Novak couldn't play at the Australian Open, and he couldn't play at the US Open either. One would think that he would try to get vaccinated to avoid such blows to his career, but the Serbian mentioned that he knew his decision would cost him, but he won't compromise on his principles. So despite being banned from 2 tournaments, the 35-year-old maintained his initial decision of not getting vaccinated. He knew there would be consequences for his decision, and it was something he was ready to deal with. Following up, here's Todd Woodbridge's opinion on the whole situation, but now it's all in the past. We're going to see the Serbian at the tournament in January, and adding to that, Todd Woodbridge, the Australian tennis legend, has much to say about it. According to Woodbridge, everyone wants to see the best of the best compete at the Australian Open, so it's not the same with Djokovic not there, and in light of that, he's happy that the Serbian can be part of it in 2023. Last but not least, despite shaky beginnings, the Serbian ended this season in style. Yes, Djokovic didn't have the best start this season, but he finished in 5th place on the ATP rankings list, and he managed to win many other tournaments to make sure he stays at the top. According to Djokovic himself, he was really hoping to deliver a good performance despite all the hurdles, and he did that. What's more, he's optimistic that he'll do the same thing next season because once he gets going, there's no stopping. It was a pretty challenging season for the Serbian, but he managed to brave through these storms and find his footing. Now, let's just hope he can stay consistent and still give us his best. That's a wrap for this video, my friends. What do you think of Djokovic being allowed at the Australian Open? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're down there, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.